The sun bled low over the prairie, a swollen orange wound in the sky, casting long shadows over the brittle grass and the sun-bleached bones of forgotten cattle. Dust drifted in lazy spirals, and the air smelled of iron and storm. Eli McCrae rode into Whiskey Bend with the wind at his back and the silence of the dead clenched in his jaw. His boots were worn, his coat frayed at the cuffs, and the mare beneath him carried both rider and regret with steady weariness. He hadn't been seen in town for near 3 years, not since the night his wife died whispering another woman's name. The townsfolk didn't look at him, not directly. Heads turned just enough to show they'd noticed, but never enough to greet. The saloon piano faltered when he passed, a sour note swallowed quickly in silence. Ruby Calhoun stood on the boardwalk outside her place, apron stained with wine and something darker. She didn't smile, just narrowed her eyes and spit into the dust. Whiskey Bend's ghosts are walking early this year, she muttered to no one in particular. Eli dismounted in front of the general store. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle as he stepped inside. A boy behind the counter stiffened, then reached for the ledger like it might shield him. Eli didn't bother with greetings. He picked up salt, lamp oil, oats, the bare minimum a man needed to survive the long stretch of winter alone. When he dropped coins on the counter, they clinked like a pistol hammer pulled back too slow. "Why need anything else?" the boy asked, voice breaking on the edge of fear. Eli looked up, and for a moment the storm of his grief passed through his eyes like lightning behind dark glass. Then he shook his head. No. He left the store and found the town more silent than before. Folks watched from inside lace curtains and warped windows, pretending not to. Eli led the mare out by the reins, turning her toward the western trail that skirted the river. It was near dark when he passed her cabin. Clara June Hollying stood ankle-deep in the creek, skirts wet and tangled, hair unbound like prairie fire around her shoulders. She turned as he passed, lifting her chin just enough to acknowledge him. Her eyes, sharp as obsidian, held no fear, only knowing. She'd been the last person his wife ever visited. That was enough to brand her a witch, a temptress, or worse in the mouths of those with nothing better to do than chew bitterness. Eli didn't slow, but his hands tightened on the reins, knuckles going pale. Farther down the trail, the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. Thunder cracked in the distance, low and long, like a voice raised in warning. The scent of smoke drifted faint on the wind, and Eli's mare danced uneasily. He followed her gaze to a lone colt limping through the brush, its flank gashed, breath ragged. "Damn fool," Eli muttered. He dismounted slowly, approaching the animal with his hands low. It startled, kicked weakly, then collapsed. Eli pressed his palm to its heaving side. Still warm, still fighting. He looked up. Clara's cabin was a few hundred yards off, smoke curling from its chimney. He didn't want to go near her, didn't want the memories of the stays or the whispers that clung like bays to her name. But the colt was dying, and he'd never been the sort to walk past a thing that needed saving. Grunting, he hoisted the creature over his shoulders. Blood soaked into his shirt, hot and metallic. The climb to her cabin felt longer than it should have, each step dredging up memories he'd worked hard to bury. His wife's face in fever, her cracked lips mouthing, "June." Clara opened the door before he could knock. Lantern light spilled across her face. No makeup, no softness, just raw bone and grit. She said nothing as she stepped aside, letting him pass into the single-room cabin that smelled of cedar, tobacco, and something faintly sweet beneath. He laid the colt down on a thick blanket near the hearth. The fire popped. Clara closed the door behind him, then knelt beside the animal, hands steady as she examined the wound. Her fingers brushed his, just once, and it was enough to send a tremor through the silence. "Barbed wire," she said. Eli nodded. "North fence." She glanced at him, eyes unreadable. "You own that land still?" He hesitated. "It owns me." She gave a quiet sound, somewhere between agreement and mourning. Then she stood, crossed the room, and returned with a basin, cloth, and bottle of clear liquor. She worked without words, cleaning the wound as the colt whimpered. Eli crouched beside her, not helping, not leaving. "You still carve?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. His breath caught. No. She nodded again, like she already knew the answer. Outside, thunder rolled closer. Rain began to fall in slow, heavy drops that tapped against the windows like questions left unanswered. The storm's breath leaked through the seams of the cabin, stirring the lantern's flame. Clara's hair brushed her cheek as she leaned over the colt, and in that moment Eli saw the past layered over the present like a ghost. His wife, Clara, the church pews, the whispered names. He stood abruptly. The room felt too small. "I'll leave it here," he said, voice hoarse. Clara didn't stop him, didn't offer thanks. He opened the door just as lightning lit the prairie white. The rain poured now, washing the trail into mud. As he stepped outside, he heard her voice behind him, soft, unbending. "Your wife wasn't afraid when she died." He turned, mouth dry. "She was free," Clara said, "even if only at the end." Eli couldn't speak. He only nodded, once, and stepped into the storm, letting the rain soak him clean as the wind howled across the prairie like a memory too loud to bury. Mornings in Whiskey Bend broke slow, like old men rising stiff from sleep. Mist clung to the low brush, reluctant to leave, and the frost turned the prairie brittle beneath boot soles. Eli McCrae walked with the cautious weight of a man who had buried too much to trust the ground. His mare was tethered just beyond Clara's cabin, steam rising from her flanks in the pale dawn. He hadn't planned to return, but the colt had lived. Clara stood at the water pump, sleeves rolled high, her hair tied back with a leather cord. She looked up only briefly when he approached, then returned to scrubbing blood from her hands. Her fingers, raw and red, moved with practiced grace. She didn't ask why he was back. Maybe she already knew. "His eating," she said, "won't put weight on the leg yet, but he'll live." Eli nodded. "You always been good with the broken ones." She rinsed her hands. "They don't expect lies." He looked toward the colt, lying nestled in a pile of old blankets just inside the cabin. The wound had crusted black around the edges, but the eyes were brighter, alert, watching, like it knew something it couldn't say. Eli cleared his throat. "You ever name him?" "Not the ones that don't belong to me." She dried her hands on her skirt and moved past him, into the cabin without another word. He followed after a long pause. The air inside was warm, thick with pine smoke and the scent of boiled herbs. She moved around the room like she'd carved the space into being with her bare hands, each motion quiet, necessary. A worn mug sat beside the hearth, still steaming. Without asking, she poured another. Black coffee, strong and bitter as gossip. Eli took it, sipped, winced. "Ain't changed much." Clara didn't smile. "Neither have you." He glanced at the window. The prairie outside was wrapped in silence, but he could feel the eyes, Ruby Calhoun's behind her lace curtains, the reverence behind his sermons. Judgment traveled faster than horses in a town like Whiskey Bend. "You know they're talking," he said. "They've always talked." "Yeah, but now they're naming names." Clara's shoulders tensed. "Yours or mine?" "Both." She sat across from him, her expression unreadable. "Let him. Truth don't need defending from liars." Eli studied her in the flickering firelight. There was something different about her now, not softer, but stripped bare of anything unnecessary. She was made of what remained after storms: stone, root, stubborn flame. He remembered the bird on her windowsill, the same shape he'd once carved for his wife in quieter days, before fever and fire and her final, whispered word, June. His voice came low. "You gave us something, didn't you?" Clara met his gaze. "A choice." He nodded slowly. "I didn't understand it then. And now?" "I don't know." They sat in silence. Outside, a hawk cried across the wide sky. The fire popped and hissed, and the colt shifted in its sleep. Eli looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused, trembling faintly. "She said your name," he said. "The night she died. Clara. June." Like it meant something. Clara's jaw clenched. It did. Eli stared at her. Was it love? No, her voice didn't rise, didn't shake. It was freedom. That word hung heavy between them. Freedom. It tasted like sin and salvation all at once. He wanted to ask more, but the look in her eyes said not yet. Some things required patience, silence, time. Later that week, Eli returned again. Then again, each visit unspoken, unpromised. He brought tools, fixed a warped shutter, patched the split rail near the river. She never asked, never thanked him. But one morning, he found a clean shirt folded across his saddle, stitched by hand, thread fine and careful. In town, Ruby Calhoun's gossip turned venomous. "She's spelling him, same as the last one," she hissed into pews and parlors. "That woman wears ruin like perfume." The Reverend gave a sermon that Sunday about wolves in sheep's clothing. No names, but everyone understood. Eli felt their eyes even at the edge of town. But he stopped hiding, rode tall, said less. One evening, just before the sky tipped into violet, he found Clara sitting by the creek, bare feet in the water, hair unbound again. She held something in her lap, a small wooden bird, its wings spread wide. Familiar, painfully so. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Carved it. Years ago." His breath hitched. "My wife. I carved her one. Just like that." Clara nodded. "She showed me. Said it was the only gift that ever felt like truth." Eli sat beside her, knees popping like dry wood. The creek whispered beneath them. For a long time, neither spoke. "She came to me," Clara said at last. "Not for love. For clarity. She needed someone to tell her she could walk away." "And you told her to leave me?" "No, I told her to choose." He exhaled, slow and uneven. The horizon bled into the earth. Thunder murmured far off again. Always far off, always circling. "I thought." He stopped, shook his head. "I thought you stole her." Clara turned to him, eyes steady. "No one stole her. You just never saw her." The words landed like iron on his chest. He wanted to argue. Couldn't. The truth was in her calm, in her stillness, in her refusal to wound him when she had every right. He stood slowly. "You ever get tired of carrying everyone else's sins?" She looked back at the creek. Only when they refused to carry their own. That night, he didn't ride home. Didn't ask permission. Just tethered his mare and sat by the fire as the storm came on. Clara didn't speak when she set a second plate on the table. Didn't stop him when he lit the hearth. The colt slept easy, the rain tapping on the roof like fingers long dead and forgiven. And for the first time in years, Eli McCrae didn't dream of fire. The sky split open the morning Eli found the bird shattered. It lay on Clara's windowsill, broken clean down the middle, its wooden wings twisted as if in flight or ruin. Rain hadn't come, but the air held that strange hush before a storm, where even the birds go quiet and the land forgets to breathe. He stood there for a long while, hand hovering above the carved ruin, heart louder than the wind. Clara wasn't inside. The fire had gone cold, the hearth scattered with ash, and her coat was missing from the peg. The colt still lay curled in its corner, healed enough now to lift its head and watch him with wide, dark eyes that said nothing but understood too much. Eli turned, jaw tight, and stepped into the rising heat of the day, scanning the horizon until he found her shape near the river bend, standing alone beneath the cottonwoods. He approached slow, boots crushing brittle twigs, the wind tugging at his coat like it wanted him to turn back. Clara didn't move, didn't speak. Her arms were folded across her chest, and her face was carved from something harder than bone. When he stopped a few paces behind her, she finally said, "They came this morning. 3 of them. One had a badge." His stomach dropped. "Sheriff. Deputized preacher's son. Said they were opening an inquiry. Something about a confession. So they'd heard talk in town." Eli's throat went dry. "Talk about what?" "About how your wife died. About what she said. About what she might have meant." He stepped forward. "I never told anyone." "I know." They stood in silence, river gurgling over stone, sky growing heavier by the breath. Clara turned to face him then, and her eyes, so often unreadable, were bright with something unspeakable, not fear, not anger. "Grief. You brought this here," she said. "Not accusation, just truth." Eli looked down. "I didn't mean to." "Meaning's got nothing to do with what we leave behind." The words dug into him, sharper than blame. He hadn't meant for the visits to turn into something. Hadn't meant to stay. Hadn't meant to confess. But somehow, over coffee and silence and the shared tending of a wounded colt, something had begun to uncoil inside him. Something warm. Something terrifying. I never wanted her dead, he said quietly. You need to know that. I know. Clara's voice caught on the edge of wind. But you let the truth rot long enough for people to plant their own. He nodded, shame settling like dust in his lungs. The sun shifted above them, gold bleeding toward rust, and a gust carried the scent of wood smoke and fireweed. He remembered the night of his wife's death, the fevered raving, the soft word Clara, the flash of silver when he grabbed her too hard, tried to silence what he didn't understand. Blood on the floor, a prayer choked on regret. I thought she was leaving me for you, he said. She wasn't. I know that now. They stood like that a while, two silhouettes against a sky too big to ever belong to people with hearts this tired. Then Clara spoke, softer now. They'll come again. I'll tell them everything. She looked up at him. They won't care. They're not looking for truth. They are looking to clean the town with fire. I won't let them touch you. That's not yours to promise. Eli stepped forward and placed the broken bird into her hands. She looked at it like it was a child, fragile and bleeding from a wound she couldn't fix. I kept it, she whispered. Not for memory, for hope. A long silence stretched between them, until thunder rolled low on the horizon. Closer now, urgent. Clara looked back toward the cabin. You should go. I'm not running anymore. You might not have a choice. She turned then, walking up the slope toward her home, and he followed without asking. The colt brayed softly as they entered, and Clara moved to tend the fire, the silence between them thick as unspoken prayer. Eli leaned against the wall, watching her. The light of the flame danced across her face, casting shadows like scars. I want to stay, he said. She didn't turn. Wanting won't save either of us. He moved closer. Let me try. Now she turned. Her gaze was fierce, not unkind. You don't owe me redemption. I'm not here for redemption, he said. I'm here because every quiet thing I never understood before makes sense in your silence. Clara blinked. Once. Then she reached forward, took his hand, and placed the broken bird between them. Then help me fix this. They worked through the night, carving new wings, sanding edges smooth. No words passed. Only breath and movement and the soft rasp of blade against wood. Outside, the storm circled but never touched down. Inside, time slowed. When dawn came, they stood together by the window, watching a blood-orange sun rise over the prairie. In the distance, 3 horses kicked up dust on the trail to her land. Clara didn't move. Neither did Eli. The new bird sat on the windowsill between them, whole again. She said, You don't have to do this. He answered, I already did. And in the hush before thunder, when the wind held its breath and the world forgot its cruelty, Eli McCrae stepped outside, back straight, eyes forward, not to beg for forgiveness, but to finally offer the truth, with both hands open.